I need to get this out because I've been sitting on this for a week now, and I'm about to lose it. Actually, scratch that. I already lost it. I just haven't shown anyone yet. My wife Sabrina and I have been married for 3 years. She's 7 months pregnant with what we just found out is a boy. We'd been trying for almost 2 years before it finally happened, so yeah, this baby was a big deal for both of us. Or at least I thought it was for both of us. Some background that matters. I'm 31, I work in tech support for a mid-sized company, and I make decent money. Not Silicon Valley money, but enough that we've never struggled. Sabrina works part-time at a boutique, mostly because she wanted something to do, not because we needed the income. We live in a house I bought 5 years ago, before we even met. Paid for it myself, it's in my name only. This detail is going to matter later, trust me. Sabrina's family has money. Real money. Her dad, Harvey, owns some kind of distribution business, and her mom, Esther, has never worked a day in her life. They live in one of those neighborhoods where the HOA fines you if your grass is half an inch too long. Meanwhile, I grew up in a regular middle-class family where we actually had to work for things. I thought Sabrina was different from her parents. I thought she saw past all that status garbage. I was wrong. The gender reveal party was last Saturday at Harvey and Esther's place. Big backyard, catering, the whole 9 yards because they insisted on paying for everything. Sabrina wanted something smaller, but her mother wouldn't hear of it. Fine, whatever. Free food, and they're excited about their first grandkid. I can deal with some over-the-top decorations and Harvey's friends asking me what I do for a living in that tone that says they already know I'm not worth their time. I was hanging blue streamers in their gazebo when Harvey walked over. He had that look on his face, the one he gets when he's about to say something he thinks is helpful but is actually just him being a jerk. He stood there watching me for a minute. Then he started talking about how Sabrina was glowing, how excited he was about the baby. Normal grandfather stuff. I was thinking maybe this was going to be one of those rare moments where he actually acted like we were family. Then he said it. He told me it was good that Anthony was still around to provide moral support during this time. That Sabrina had made a terrible decision marrying someone who couldn't even afford to buy her a proper car. And that she was lucky her ex-boyfriend understood what she really needed. I'm standing there with blue streamers in my hands, and my father-in-law just told me my pregnant wife's ex-boyfriend is providing her with support. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like I should be grateful. I asked him what he meant by that. Harvey just smiled and said that Anthony had always been good to Sabrina, that he came from a good family, and that some men know how to take care of women properly. Then he looked at my 2019 Toyota Camry in their driveway and said at least Anthony had bought Sabrina a proper vehicle when they were dating. For context, Sabrina drives a 2023 Audi Q5. I bought it for her last year when her old car died. Apparently that doesn't count because it's not expensive enough or flashy enough or whatever stupid metric these people use. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to ask him if he knew his daughter was texting her ex while pregnant with my kid. But I didn't. I just smiled and said something about how we were managing fine. Then went back to hanging decorations like nothing happened. The whole time my brain was screaming. Sabrina was across the yard with her mom and some friends, laughing at something on her phone. When she saw me looking, she touched her stomach and smiled at me. That smile that used to make everything okay. Except now, I was thinking about Harvey's comments and wondering what the hell was going on. The party went on for another 3 hours. I watched Sabrina the whole time. She was on her phone constantly, smiling at the screen, typing away. Every time someone asked who she was texting, she said it was pregnancy group chats or baby stuff. Her mom kept making comments about how social media-obsessed young people are these days, and everyone laughed. Anthony's name came up twice during conversations I overheard. Once when Esther was talking to another woman about how he'd done so well for himself in real estate. And once when Harvey mentioned to someone that it was nice Sabrina had maintained such good friendships from her past. Nobody thought it was weird. Or maybe they all knew and I was the only idiot in the dark. We drove home separately because Sabrina had come straight from work. I sat in my apparently inadequate Camry and tried to make sense of what Harvey had said. Moral support from her ex. Still around. Lucky he's there. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. That night, Sabrina took a shower around 10 p.m. She left her phone on the nightstand face down. She always leaves it face down now. I never thought about it before, but suddenly it felt significant. I could hear the water running. I could pick up that phone and look. I could know for sure if I was being paranoid or if Harvey's comments meant what I thought they meant. I picked it up. No Face ID because of the angle, but I knew her passcode. We'd never hidden that from each other. Or so I thought. She'd changed it. The code that had been her mom's birthday for 3 years was suddenly different. I tried her dad's birthday. Wrong. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. The shower was still running. I had maybe 3 more minutes. I tried Anthony. I didn't know his birthday, but I remembered Sabrina mentioning once that they'd dated for 4 years in college. I tried random combinations. Then I remembered something else she'd said years ago, back when we first started dating. She'd mentioned that she and Anthony had this special number they used for everything, some inside joke about the first place they'd met. Being apartment 1847. The phone unlocked. I opened her messages. The pregnancy group chats were there, sure, but there was also a conversation with a contact saved as A. The most recent message was from 3 hours ago during the party. From her, Dad's being so obvious about it, lol. Poor R has no idea. From A, when are you going to tell him? Her. After the baby. No point messing up my living situation while I'm pregnant. I scrolled up. Weeks of messages. Months. They'd been talking the entire time she'd been pregnant. No, longer than that. They'd been talking before she got pregnant. The messages weren't even trying to hide what was going on. She told him she missed him. He told her he'd never stopped loving her. She said marrying me was the practical choice, but being with him was what she actually wanted. There was a message from 2 months ago where she told him the baby might not even be mine, that we'd been having problems conceiving and that she'd seen him a few times during that period, and maybe she'd gotten lucky with him instead. He asked if she was going to tell me. She said what was the point? I'd never know the difference, and this way the baby would have financial security. The shower turned off. I put the phone back exactly where it was, face down on the nightstand. I got into bed and pretended to read something on my own phone. Sabrina came out in her robe, picked up her phone without looking at me, and went back into the bathroom to do her skincare routine or whatever. I lay there trying to process what I'd just read. My wife might be pregnant with her ex-boyfriend's baby. She married me for financial security. She thinks I'm too stupid to figure it out. Her parents know. Harvey's comments suddenly made perfect sense. They all knew. Sabrina came back to bed around 11. She plugged her phone in on her side, kissed me on the cheek, and said she was exhausted from the party. I said something about it being a good day. She agreed and rolled over. At 11:47 p.m., her phone started buzzing. Not ringing, just buzzing with notifications. I counted 6 in a row. She grabbed it fast, looked at the screen, then whispered that she needed to take this call and went downstairs. I waited 2 minutes, then I followed her. I stood in the hallway where I could hear her, but she couldn't see me. She was in the kitchen, her voice low and excited. She kept saying she wished he was there, that it should have been his baby she was celebrating today, that she hated pretending. She said my name like it tasted bad. She told him she loved him. The call lasted 43 minutes. I timed it. I went back upstairs and got into bed before she came back. When she slid under the covers, I could feel her smiling in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, making plans. See, here's the thing nobody knows about me. I'm not the pushover Harvey thinks I am. That house we live in? It's mine. Paid off last year. Sabrina's name isn't on the deed because we'd talked about buying something bigger together eventually and keeping this as a rental property. She signed a post-nuptial agreement 2 years ago when my grandmother left me a substantial inheritance. Harvey and Esther had actually insisted on it to protect their daughter, in case I turned out to be after her family money. Joke's on them. I'd been putting away money in accounts Sabrina didn't know about. Not hiding it exactly, but not advertising it either. Her family's attitude toward me had always rubbed me wrong, and some paranoid part of me wanted to make sure I had options if things went south. Turns out that paranoia was justified. Over the next 5 days, I acted completely normal. I went to work, came home, asked Sabrina about her day, talked about baby names, assembled the crib we'd ordered. She thought everything was fine. She kept texting Anthony, kept having late-night calls she thought I didn't notice. Her dad called twice to check in, and both times I could hear him asking Sabrina questions about me in the background before she took the phone to another room. I didn't confront her. I didn't let on that anything was wrong, but I was busy. I called my lawyer, a guy named Richard, who'd handled my grandmother's estate. I explained the situation. He told me what I needed to know about divorce when there's a pregnancy involved, about paternity tests, about protecting my assets. I pulled bank statements, gathered evidence, made copies of everything. Yesterday was Thursday. I worked from home. Sabrina was supposed to be at the boutique until 4 p.m. At 2:30, I decided to go pick up some lunch from this sandwich place we both like. It's in a strip mall about 15 minutes from our house. I saw Sabrina's Audi in the parking lot. She was supposed to be at work. The sandwich shop was next to a furniture store. I was walking toward the restaurant when I saw them through the furniture store window. Sabrina and Anthony were looking at cribs. She had her hand on her stomach and he had his arm around her shoulders. They were laughing. A salesperson was showing them something on a tablet. Anthony was nodding, pulling out his wallet. I stood there watching them shop for baby furniture together. For my baby. Or maybe his baby. Did it even matter anymore? I didn't go inside. I got back in my inadequate Camry and drove home. I sat in my paid-off house and I waited. Sabrina got home at 4:15. She said work had been slow, that she'd left a little early because her feet were swelling. She asked what I wanted for dinner. I suggested we order in. We sat on the couch watching some cooking show, her phone buzzing with messages she kept angling away from me. At 8 p.m., my phone rang. It was Harvey. He said he wanted to talk to me about something important. Could I come by tomorrow evening? I said sure. He said to come alone, that this was a conversation between men. After I hung up, Sabrina asked what her dad wanted. I told her. She got this look on her face, worried, but also something else. Excited, maybe. She said her dad probably just wanted to talk about helping out with the baby, that he'd been mentioning setting up a college fund. I smiled and said that sounded nice. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered it. A man's voice asked if this was Richard. I said yes. He said his name was Anthony and that we needed to talk about Sabrina. My wife went pale. I looked right at her and said, sure. What did he want to talk about? Anthony said he thought I should know that he and Sabrina had been seeing each other, that he loved her, that the baby might be his, that Sabrina had been planning to leave me after the birth, but he couldn't keep lying to me anymore, that it wasn't right. Sabrina was shaking her head frantically, reaching for my phone. I stood up and walked away from her. I told Anthony thank you for the information. He seemed surprised I was taking it so calmly. He asked if I wanted to meet up and talk about it. I said no, I had everything I needed. After I hung up, Sabrina started talking fast. It wasn't what I thought. Anthony was lying. He was obsessed with her. She'd been trying to let him down gently. Yes, they'd been talking, but only because he kept contacting her and she didn't want to upset me by telling me. She'd only met up with him that one time to tell him to stop. She loved me. The baby was definitely mine. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She kept talking. She was crying now, saying her father was going to be so upset that Anthony had ruined everything, that I had to believe her. She grabbed my hands and put them on her stomach, said this was our baby, our family. I pulled my hands away. I told her I needed some air and walked out the door. I drove around for 2 hours thinking about everything. The messages on her phone, Harvey's comments, the furniture store, Anthony's call, her panic, all of it. When I got home, there were 17 missed calls on my phone. 12 from Sabrina, 3 from Esther, 2 from Harvey. There were 40-plus texts ranging from Sabrina begging me to come home and talk to her, to Harvey demanding I call him immediately, to Esther saying we needed to handle this as a family. I didn't respond to any of them. I went inside. Sabrina was on the couch, red-eyed and frantic. She started talking the second I walked in. I held up my hand and told her I'd be sleeping in the guest room and we'd talk tomorrow. She followed me upstairs, still talking. I went into the guest room and locked the door. This morning, I woke up to my phone exploding. 44 missed calls between midnight and 7 a.m. 27 from Sabrina, 10 from Harvey, 5 from Esther, 2 from Anthony again. There were also messages from Harvey saying he wanted to meet today, that we needed to discuss my behavior and my responsibilities. From Esther saying I was being immature and that Sabrina was pregnant and stressed and I needed to think about the baby. From Sabrina saying she was sorry, that she could explain everything, that her parents were upset with both of us. And one message from Anthony saying he was sorry for calling, that Sabrina had convinced him I already knew everything, that he felt like an idiot. I'm sitting here now, reading all these messages, and I'm realizing something. They're all panicking. They thought they had this handled. They thought I was stupid enough to just accept everything. Harvey's comments, Sabrina's affair, the questions about paternity, all of it. They had a plan, and Anthony just blew it up by developing a conscience. Now they're scrambling to control the situation. Harvey wants to talk, which probably means threaten me or try to pay me off. Esther wants to rug weep and pretend everything's fine. Sabrina wants to convince me Anthony was lying, and Anthony apparently wants to apologize for tattling. The funny thing is, I already knew all of this before Anthony called. I'd already talked to my lawyer. I already had my own plans in motion. Anthony just accelerated the timeline. I haven't responded to anyone yet. I'm letting them panic. I'm letting them wonder what I'm going to do. Because here's what they don't know. I've spent the last 5 days setting up exactly what I need to burn their whole plan to the ground. And I'm going to enjoy every second of it. Update 1. All right. So I know you're all waiting to hear what happened with Harvey. Before I get into that, let me address some comments. Yes, I know I should get a paternity test, obviously. My lawyer already explained that I can't force one until after the baby is born unless Sabrina agrees to it, which she won't. And yes, I know some of you think I should have kicked her out immediately. Here's why I didn't. Because the house is mine, and I'm not giving up my leverage by doing something stupid while I'm angry. Shout out to the commenter who said Harvey probably has some kind of plan beyond just the affair. because you were right. Friday morning, Sabrina was a wreck. I came out of the guest room around 7 a.m. and she was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone. She looked like she hadn't slept. She started talking the second she saw me, asking if we could please discuss everything, saying she understood I was upset, but we needed to communicate. I told her I had to go to work and we'd talk later. She followed me to the door, asking when later was. I said after I met with her father. She asked if she could come to that meeting. I said no. Harvey specifically said just us. She got this panicked look and asked what I was going to say to him. I told her I guess we'd find out. I went to my office because I genuinely did have work to do, and also because I needed to not be in that house with her. My coworker noticed I was distracted and asked if everything was okay with the baby. I said everything was fine. That's what you do, right? Pretend everything's normal while your whole life is falling apart. Harvey texted me around noon, saying to come by at 6 p.m. Not asking, telling. I responded with a thumbs up emoji because I knew it would irritate him. I left work at 5:30 and drove to their house. The same house where a week ago I was hanging decorations for a gender reveal party. Now I was walking into whatever ambush Harvey had planned. Esther answered the door. She did this thing where she smiled, but her eyes were cold, and she said it was good I came, that we all needed to work through this together as a family. I asked if Sabrina was there. She said no, just her and Harvey, that they thought it would be better to speak with me privately first. She led me to Harvey's study. Big mahogany desk, leather chairs, bookshelves full of books that looked like they'd never been opened. Harvey was sitting behind his desk. He didn't stand up when I came in. He just gestured to the chair across from him and told Esther she could leave. We sat there for a solid 10 seconds just looking at each other. Then Harvey started talking. He said he wanted to clear the air, that there had been some misunderstandings, and that we needed to discuss how to move forward in a way that was best for everyone involved, especially the baby. I didn't say anything. I just waited. He shifted in his chair and said he understood I was upset about Anthony's phone call. He said Anthony shouldn't have done that it was inappropriate and had caused unnecessary confusion. He said the situation wasn't what it looked like. I asked what situation he was referring to. Harvey got this look on his face like he was dealing with a particularly slow child. He said the situation with Anthony, that yes, Sabrina had been in contact with him, but it was innocent. They'd dated in college, they'd remained friends, and Anthony had been supportive during her pregnancy because he understood what she was going through in a way that I apparently couldn't. I asked him what way that was. He said Anthony came from a similar background as their family, that he understood the expectations, the lifestyle, the pressures, that sometimes Sabrina needed to talk to someone who got it. He said it wasn't personal against me. It was just that I came from a different world, and there were things I wouldn't understand. I sat there listening to him explain how my wife needed emotional support from her ex-boyfriend because I was too poor and too stupid to understand rich people problems. I wanted to flip his desk over, but I kept my mouth shut and let him keep talking. Harvey said that Anthony had gotten the wrong idea about his friendship with Sabrina, that he'd developed feelings that Sabrina didn't return, that the phone call was Anthony's way of trying to cause problems in our marriage because he was jealous. He said they'd already spoken to Anthony and made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable. I asked if they'd spoken to Anthony before or after he called me. Harvey paused. He said after, that they'd gone to see him Thursday to straighten things out. So let me get this straight, I said. Anthony calls me Wednesday night to tell me he's sleeping with my wife. You and Esther drive over to see him Thursday. And now Friday, you're telling me he was lying and just jealous. Harvey said that was correct. He said Anthony had admitted to them that he'd exaggerated the nature of his relationship with Sabrina because he was hoping to break us up. I asked if Anthony had apologized to me. Harvey said he was sure Anthony would, given time, but that the important thing was that Sabrina and I move past this and focus on our family. He said Sabrina was beside herself with worry, that the stress wasn't good for the baby. I asked him about the furniture store. His face did this thing where I could see him trying to figure out what I knew. He asked what furniture store. The one where Sabrina and Anthony were shopping for cribs on Thursday, I said, while she was supposed to be at work. The one where I watched them for 15 minutes through the window while Anthony had his arm around her. Harvey was quiet for a long time. Then he said there must be an explanation for that maybe they'd run into each other. I asked if he really thought I was that stupid. He got this look on his face, the same one he'd had at the gender reveal party. He said he didn't think I was stupid. He said he thought I was in over my head. He said I'd married into a family with certain expectations and resources, and that I needed to understand how things worked. Then he laid it out for me. He said Sabrina had made a mistake marrying me, that she'd been rebelling against their guidance, trying to prove she didn't need their help. He said I'd been convenient, young enough, decent-looking enough, stable enough. but that the reality was that Sabrina wasn't happy living the kind of middle-class life I could provide. He said Anthony was from their world, that he and Sabrina had dated for 4 years before she decided to strike out on her own, that Anthony had always been willing to wait for her to come to her senses, that the pregnancy had made everything more complicated, but that they could work through it. I asked him what working through it meant. Harvey said that Sabrina needed to decide what she wanted, that if she chose to try to make our marriage work, they would support that. But that if she chose Anthony, I needed to understand that was her choice and I needed to respect it. He said either way, the baby was going to be taken care of, and that my role in the child's life would be determined by how reasonable I was willing to be. The way he said my role made it clear he didn't think I should have one. I asked him if Sabrina knew he was telling me all this. He said Sabrina was confused right now, that the pregnancy hormones had her all mixed up, that she needed guidance from people who knew what was best for her. He said that was why he was talking to me, man to man, so we could come to an understanding. An understanding, I said. He nodded. He said they were prepared to be generous, that if I agreed to step back and let Sabrina figure out what she wanted without pressure, they would make sure I was compensated for my time. He said divorce was expensive and messy, but it didn't have to be. He was offering to pay me to divorce his daughter. I asked how much. He looked pleased that I'd asked. He said they could discuss specific numbers, but he was thinking somewhere in the range of $200,000. Enough for a down payment on a new place, money to relocate if I wanted. All I had to do was agree that any paternity test would be handled discreetly, that I wouldn't make a scene, and that I would cooperate with whatever custody arrangement she decided on. If there was custody, he added, because there was a possibility that Anthony was the father, and in that case, it would be better for everyone if I just walked away completely. I sat there looking at him offering me money to disappear from my own kid's life. I asked him what happened if I said no. Harvey's expression changed. He said that would be unfortunate. He said they didn't want things to get ugly, but that if I insisted on being difficult, they had resources I didn't. He said a prolonged divorce would drain my savings while they could afford the best lawyers in the state. He said custody battles were expensive and emotionally destructive, especially when there were questions about paternity. He said I seemed like a reasonable person, that I should think very carefully about what kind of life I wanted for myself. Tied up in court for years, broke, fighting for a child that might not even be mine? Or walking away with enough money to start over? Then he said something that made everything click. He said this wasn't personal, that I'd been a phase for Sabrina, a nice guy who'd been there when she needed someone stable. But that phase's end. He said Anthony had always been the right choice and that it was better for me to accept that now rather than drag it out. I asked him how long they'd been planning this. He smiled. He said planning was a strong word, but that when Sabrina came to them 6 months ago saying she was having doubts about our marriage, they'd encouraged her to think about what she really wanted. When she'd mentioned reconnecting with Anthony, they'd supported that. When she got pregnant, it complicated things, but they'd figured out a way to handle it. 6 months ago, Sabrina was 4 months pregnant. She'd been having doubts about us since the first trimester while I was picking out nursery colors. I asked if the baby was mine. Harvey said that was something for the paternity test to determine, but that either way, the child would be raised by someone who could provide properly. If it was mine biologically, they would work out appropriate visitation. If it was Anthony's, well, that would simplify everything. I stood up. Harvey asked if we had an understanding. I told him I'd think about his offer. He said not to think too long. He walked me to the door and put his hand on my shoulder, told me he hoped I'd make the smart choice. Esther was waiting in the hallway. She said she hoped Harvey and I had a productive talk. I said very productive. I drove home trying to process everything. Harvey had just told me that my wife's family had been actively helping her cheat on me, that they'd encouraged her to reconnect with her ex, that they'd been planning for months to get rid of me. $200,000 to disappear from my own life. When I got home, Sabrina was in the kitchen making dinner. She turned around when I walked in and tried to smile. Asked how the talk with her dad went. I said it was interesting. She asked what he said. I told her he offered me $200,000 to divorce her and leave. She dropped the spoon she was holding. She said, "He what?" I repeated it. "He offered me money to walk away, to let you figure out if you want to be with Anthony without me in the way." Sabrina started shaking her head. She said that wasn't what they'd discussed. That wasn't what she'd wanted. I asked what she'd wanted then. She said she just wanted time to figure things out, that she'd been confused, that her parents had misunderstood. I asked if it was true that she'd been having doubts about us since she was 4 months pregnant. She didn't answer. I asked if it was true that her parents had encouraged her to reconnect with Anthony. She said it wasn't like that. I pulled out my phone. I showed her the screenshots. The message where she said the baby might be Anthony's. Where she said marrying me was practical, but she wanted to be with him. where she said she'd tell me after the baby was born. Her face went white. She asked when I'd looked at her phone. I said the night of the gender reveal party. She said I'd gone through her phone without permission. I asked if that was really what she wanted to focus on right now. She sank into a chair. She said those messages didn't mean what they looked like, that she'd been venting to Anthony because she was emotional and hormonal, that she loved me and wanted our marriage. I asked why she'd changed her phone password to Anthony's special number. She said she hadn't. Then she realized I knew what the number was and asked how. I told her she'd mentioned it years ago. She said she didn't remember that it must have been random. By accident, I said. To the exact number you and your ex used for everything. She started crying. She said she was sorry, that she'd messed up, that she'd gotten scared about being a mother and had reached out to someone from her past, that she never meant for any of this to happen. I asked if she'd slept with Anthony while we were married. She said no, absolutely not. Just that one time before we got married when we were having trouble conceiving, but nothing after. So just the one time, I said. The time where she might have gotten pregnant with Anthony's kid while married to me. She was sobbing now. She said she was so sorry, that she didn't know what she was thinking, that she'd made a horrible mistake and regretted it every day. I asked when this happened. She said around the time we were doing all the fertility stuff. She said she'd felt like she was broken. She said she'd run into Anthony at some work thing, and they'd talked and one thing led to another. She said she'd felt terrible immediately after. Then 2 weeks later she found out she was pregnant and she was so happy. She said it didn't even occur to her that it might be Anthony's until she was already several months along. By then she was too scared to say anything. She said her parents found out because her mom had noticed she was acting weird. They'd told her not to tell me because it would just cause problems. They said to wait until after the baby was born and do a quiet test and deal with it then, if necessary. So your whole family has known since you were pregnant that this baby might not be mine, I said. And you all just decided not to tell me. She said it wasn't like that. They thought it probably was mine. The timing made it more likely. They just didn't want to worry me unnecessarily. I asked about the messages saying she wanted to be with Anthony. She said she'd gotten confused, that Anthony had been texting her saying things about how good they'd been together, that her parents liked him better than me anyway. She said she'd gotten caught up in the fantasy of it, but that it wasn't real, that we were real. I asked if she'd made a choice between me and Anthony. Which one would she pick? She said me. She'd pick me. She loved me. I asked if she'd told Anthony that. She didn't answer. I asked again. I said if she was so sure she wanted to be with me, had she told Anthony it was over? She said she'd tried, but that he kept reaching out, that her parents kept inviting him to things, that she couldn't just cut him off completely? I asked if she wanted to cut him off completely. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I told her I was going back to the guest room. She asked what next steps meant. I said I needed to talk to my lawyer about how divorce worked when there's a pregnancy involved. She grabbed my arm. She said we couldn't get divorced. Not now. Not with the baby coming. She said we could work through this. I asked if she'd agree to a paternity test now, before the baby was born. She said those were risky, that they could hurt the baby. I said there were safe ones now, just a blood test from her. She said she'd have to think about it, that she needed to talk to her doctor. I pulled my arm away and walked upstairs. She followed me to the guest room door, begging me not to do this. I closed the door. My phone has been going off all night. Sabrina sending me essays about how sorry she is. Esther saying I'm being unreasonable. Harvey saying his offer stands, but the longer I wait, the less generous they'll be. Here's what I'm realizing. They had a plan. Get Sabrina pregnant with someone's baby. Didn't matter whose. Keep me around as the stable husband. Let her keep seeing Anthony on the side. After the baby was born, do a quiet test. If it was mine, figure out how to ease me out. If it was Anthony's, pay me off. They thought I'd be so overwhelmed and grateful to be part of their family that I'd just accept whatever scraps they gave me. They thought I was so far below their social class that I'd take the money and run. They didn't count on me being smart enough to figure it out before they were ready. They didn't count on Anthony having a conscience. And they definitely didn't count on me having resources of my own. I have a house that's paid off in my name only. I have a postnup that protects my inheritance. I have screenshots of Sabrina's messages. I have my lawyer drawing up divorce papers. Harvey wanted to know if we had an understanding. We do. I understand that they think I'm beneath them, that they think they can buy me off. They're about to find out how wrong they are. Update 2. Quick response to comments. Yes, I'm still in the house with Sabrina. No, I'm not worried about false accusations because I've been recording everything on my phone since this started. My lawyer suggested it, and it's legal in my state. And to whoever said I should just take Harvey's money and run, did you even read my post? Monday morning, I met with Richard, my lawyer. I brought everything, the screenshots from Sabrina's phone. The timeline, details about the house and post-nup, recordings from the weekend. He spent 2 hours going through it all while I sat there drinking terrible office coffee. Richard looked up and said I was in a better position than most men in my situation. The house, being solely in my name, was huge. The post-nup protecting my inheritance was huge. The recordings of Sabrina admitting to the affair were huge. He said most guys come to him with nothing but suspicions. I came with documentation and assets. Then he told me something I didn't know. In my state, if you're married when a child is born, you're automatically presumed to be the father. Even if a paternity test later proves you're not, you can still be on the hook for child support because you were married at birth. Unless you challenge paternity before or immediately after birth and can prove the mother committed adultery, which I could prove on recording. Richard said I could file for divorce immediately, include the affair and paternity questions in the filing, and request a court-ordered paternity test. If the baby turned out not to be mine, I would have no financial obligation. If the baby was mine, we'd deal with custody from a position of strength because of her infidelity. But here's where it got interesting. The house was my separate property, not marital property. Sabrina had no claim to it. I could tell her to leave anytime I wanted. Richard said there was more. The postnup established that assets I brought into the marriage stayed separate. Sabrina had contributed nothing to household expenses. In a divorce, she'd get basically nothing. No house, no savings, no spousal support. The only thing she'd have a claim to was child support if the baby was mine. Richard asked what I wanted to do. I told him about Harvey's offer. He laughed. He said 200,000 sounded like a lot until you realized I'd be giving up a paid-off house worth at least 400,000, plus all my other assets, plus any claim to my own child if the baby was mine. I left his office with divorce papers ready to file, a court date scheduled for the paternity test demand, and a new understanding of exactly how much power I had. When I got home, Sabrina's car was there. So was Esther's Mercedes. I walked in to find them both in my living room. Esther was holding Sabrina's hand while Sabrina cried. They both looked up when I came in. Esther stood up and said we needed to talk like adults. I said I'd already talked to Harvey and that was enough family meetings. Esther said Harvey had explained things poorly, that he'd approached it from a business perspective when it needed a family perspective. She said they weren't trying to get rid of me. They were trying to help everyone navigate a difficult situation. She said Sabrina was their daughter and they loved her. But they also respected my role in her life. My role. Like I was an employee. I asked Sabrina why her mother was here. She said she'd called her because she was scared. She said she'd been trying to talk to me all weekend and I wouldn't listen. I said I'd listened plenty. I'd listened to her admit she'd slept with Anthony. I'd listened to her admit the baby might not be mine. What else was there to hear? Esther jumped in saying Sabrina had made a mistake, but mistakes could be forgiven. That I was being cruel by refusing to work with them. That the baby needed a stable home. I asked her if she'd told Anthony he needed to be civil too, since he might be the father. Esther's face went tight. She said Anthony had been spoken to and had agreed to step back, that he understood his interference had made things worse. I said that was convenient. Everyone had decided Anthony was the problem, not Sabrina for cheating, not Harvey and Esther for encouraging it, just Anthony for telling me the truth. Sabrina started crying harder. She said I was being cruel on purpose, that I was throwing away our marriage without even trying to fix it. I told her there was nothing to fix. She'd cheated. She'd lied. The marriage was over. Esther said I was being hasty. Where would Sabrina go? How would she support herself and a newborn? Was I really going to abandon a pregnant woman because of one mistake? One mistake, I said. One mistake that lasted months. One mistake that involved your entire family. Esther said the baby issue was fixable. They'd do the paternity test. If the baby was mine, we could work on the marriage. If it wasn't, I could walk away with no obligations. I asked what that meant. Neither answered. I said it sounded like they'd already decided that if the baby was Anthony's, they'd push me out and let him step in. Esther said that wasn't what she meant. I asked what she meant then. She said they'd support Sabrina regardless. I told them both to get out of my house. Sabrina stood up saying we weren't done talking. I said yes, we were. She said this was her house too. I told her actually it wasn't. It was my house purchased before we met, paid off before we married, with her name nowhere on the deed. Her mother needed to leave. Esther looked at Sabrina and said they'd talk later. She gave me a look that could freeze fire and walked out. After she left, Sabrina turned on me. She said I'd humiliated her in front of her mother, that I'd been nothing but hostile and cold since Friday, that she'd been trying to apologize and I just threw it back in her face. I asked if she seriously thought I was the problem. She said we were both problems, that yes, she'd screwed up, but I was refusing to even consider forgiveness, that I'd gone through her phone without permission, talked to a lawyer without telling her, that I was planning to divorce her while pregnant, She said I was treating her like an enemy. I was treating her like an enemy because she was one, I said. She and her family had been planning to get rid of me for months. She said that wasn't true. She said reconnecting with Anthony was her idea, not her parents'. She said she'd been confused and scared and had made bad choices. I pulled out my phone and played back Harvey's conversation. The part where he said they'd encouraged her to reconnect with Anthony. The part where he offered me money to leave. Sabrina went pale. She said she hadn't known her father was going to do that Harvey had overstepped. I asked if she'd told him that. She said she would. I asked why she hadn't already. Had she told them to back off? Had she told Anthony to stop contacting her? She didn't answer. I told her she was still keeping her options open, still waiting to see which choice would work out better, still letting her parents pull strings while pretending she was the victim. She asked what I wanted from her. I said I wanted the truth. Was the baby mine? She said she didn't know. I asked when she'd slept with Anthony. She said it was around mid-February. We'd been trying to get pregnant for over a year and nothing was working. She'd felt like something was wrong with her. She'd run into Anthony at some networking event. They'd talked. Coffee turned into drinks. Drinks turned into his apartment. She said it was one night. She'd regretted it immediately. Then 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. I asked when she started thinking about the timing. She said around May, when she was 3 months along. She'd realized the dates were closer than she wanted. She'd panicked and told her mother. They'd decided not to tell me because the baby was probably mine anyway. Probably mine. I asked why she'd kept talking to Anthony after that. She said he'd started texting her in June. He'd heard she was pregnant. They'd started talking again. Then he'd told her he still had feelings, that he wondered if the baby was his. She said she'd told him it probably wasn't, but he'd kept pushing. Her parents had noticed she was conflicted and had encouraged her to think about what she really wanted. I asked if what she really wanted was Anthony. She said she didn't know. Part of her loved me and wanted our life together, but part of her wondered if she'd settled, if she'd chosen me because I was safe, not because I was what she actually wanted. I asked if she'd slept with him again after we got married. She said no, just that one time. But she'd thought about it. She'd let him think maybe they could be together after the baby came. So you've been emotionally cheating on me for months while pregnant with a baby that might not even be mine, I said. She started crying. She said yes. She said she was horrible, but she wanted to try. She wanted us to work. I asked why I should believe anything she said. She said because she was being honest now. I said she was being honest because I'd already found out. If Anthony hadn't called, if I hadn't gone through her phone, she'd still be lying to me. She said that wasn't true. She'd been planning to tell me eventually. I told her I'd filed for divorce. The papers would be served in a few days. I'd requested a court-ordered paternity test immediately after birth. If the baby was mine, we'd work out custody. If not, she and Anthony could play happy family. She asked where she was supposed to go. I said she could stay until the baby was born. But after that, she needed to find somewhere else to live. She said I couldn't kick her out. I said the house was mine. She pulled out her phone and called her dad. She told him I'd filed for divorce and was kicking her out. I could hear Harvey's voice getting louder. She said he was coming over. I said the door would be locked. 20 minutes later, Harvey's car pulled up. Then Anthony's car pulled up right behind him. Both of them got out and walked toward my door. I locked it. Harvey started pounding, yelling that we needed to talk. Anthony stood behind him, looking uncomfortable. I opened the door but left the screen locked. I asked what Anthony was doing here. Harvey said they'd been meeting when Sabrina called. He said Anthony wanted to apologize. He said we all needed to sit down and figure this out. I said I was being completely reasonable, divorcing my cheating wife, protecting my assets, and demanding a paternity test. Anthony said he understood I was angry, that he hoped we could work something out that was best for everyone. I asked what he thought that looked like. He said if the baby was his, he wanted to be involved. He wanted to be a father. He said if they were going to co-parent, they needed me to be cooperative. They needed me to be cooperative. They were already planning custody for a baby that might be mine. Harvey said this attitude was why they'd tried to handle things quietly, because I was being emotional instead of practical. I told them to get off my property. Harvey said we weren't finished. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said I was asking them to leave my private property, and if they didn't, I'd call the police. Harvey looked at the phone. He said I was making a mistake, that I was burning bridges I'd regret. I said the bridges were already burned. He walked back to his car. Anthony followed. After they left, Sabrina was sitting on the stairs crying. She said I'd made everything worse, that I was being impossible. I asked if she seriously expected me to negotiate custody with her affair partner and her enabling parents. She said if we couldn't be mature, we'd end up in a brutal court battle. I said good, let it be brutal. My phone has been blowing up. Harvey threatening legal action. Esther saying I'm destroying their family. Sabrina begging me to reconsider. Anthony sent a message saying he hoped I'd calm down and think about what was best for the child. What's best for the child is having a father who actually is the father. The divorce papers will be served by end of week. The paternity test is scheduled for the day after Sabrina gives birth, and I'm just getting started. More updates after the papers are served. Final update. Before I get into what happened, I want to thank everyone who's been following this mess. Some of you called exactly what was going to happen. Some of you told me I was being too harsh. But most of you understood that I wasn't going to be the nice guy who got walked over. This is going to be long because a lot has happened in the past 3 weeks. The divorce papers were served on Wednesday, 2 days after Harvey and Anthony showed up at my house. A process server came to the door while Sabrina and I were both home. She opened the door, got handed the envelope, and just stood there staring at it. She asked if I was really doing this. I said I'd already told her I was. She went upstairs to the bedroom and called her parents. Within an hour, Harvey's lawyer had contacted Richard. They wanted to negotiate. Richard told them there was nothing to negotiate until after the paternity test. They pushed back, saying it was cruel to make a pregnant woman go through divorce proceedings. Richard said his client's wife had been having an affair with another man, and the paternity of the child was in question. So actually, it was pretty reasonable. Harvey's lawyer tried a different approach. They offered $300,000 for me to agree to an uncontested divorce and shared custody regardless of paternity. Richard called me, and I laughed. I told him to tell them no, that we were doing this my way, or we were going to court and I'd make sure everyone knew exactly why we were getting divorced. That got their attention. Thursday morning, Esther showed up at my house again. I was working from home and heard her car in the driveway. She rang the doorbell, and when I opened it, she was holding a coffee and one of those expensive bakery boxes. She asked if we could talk, just the two of us, adult to adult. She said she'd brought my favorite coffee and some pastries as a peace offering. I let her in because I wanted to hear what she had to say. We sat in my kitchen, and she did this whole speech about how she understood I was hurt and angry, but that families needed to stick together during hard times. She said Sabrina had made mistakes, but she was still my wife and the mother of my child, probably. She said they were prepared to be very generous in the divorce settlement if I was willing to be reasonable about custody and visitation. I asked what very generous meant. She said they'd pay off any remaining debts I had, help me buy a new house somewhere nice, set up a trust fund that I could access for the child's expenses. She said Harvey had been too aggressive in his approach and had upset me unnecessarily, but that they really did want what was best for everyone. I asked what they wanted in return. She said they wanted me to agree that Sabrina would have primary custody, that I could see the child on weekends and holidays, that we'd all be civil and co-parent effectively, that if the baby turned out to be Anthony's, I'd agree to step back and let him be the father without making things difficult. So the same deal Harvey had offered, just wrapped in nicer packaging and delivered by someone who smiled more. I told Esther that I appreciated her coming by, but that I wasn't interested in any deal that involved me giving up custody of my child or pretending Anthony wasn't a problem. She said I was being stubborn, that I needed to think about the child's well-being, not just my pride. I said the child's well-being required having a father who was actually the father and parents who didn't lie and cheat. Esther's smile got tight. She said I was making this much harder than it needed to be, that they were trying to help me walk away from this with dignity and financial security, but if I insisted on fighting, I'd end up with nothing. I asked how she figured that. She said Harvey had resources I couldn't imagine, that they'd bury me in legal fees, that they'd make sure every judge in the county knew I was being unreasonable and vindictive. I told her to get out of my house. She left the coffee and pastries on my counter and said she hoped I'd reconsider before I ruined my own life. After she left, I threw all of it in the trash. I wasn't eating or drinking anything that came from them. The next 2 weeks were a war of phone calls, text messages, and emails. Harvey's lawyer kept trying to negotiate. Sabrina kept crying and begging me to talk to her. Esther kept showing up with peace offerings. Anthony sent me a message saying he hoped we could be adults about this and work something out that minimized damage to everyone involved. I ignored all of them, except when Richard needed me to respond to something legal. I was waiting, because I knew something they didn't know. I'd been planning for this since the night I found those messages on Sabrina's phone. I'd just been waiting for the right moment. Sabrina went into labor on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the papers were served. She was 38 weeks along. She woke me up at 4 a.m. saying her water had broken. I drove her to the hospital because I'm not a monster, but I didn't stay in the delivery room. I told her to call her mother. She begged me to stay, saying she needed me there. I said she should have thought about that before she slept with Anthony. I waited in the hospital cafeteria. Harvey and Esther showed up an hour later. They saw me sitting there, and Esther asked why I wasn't with Sabrina. I said I'd driven her here. My job was done. Harvey said I was being petty. I said he could think whatever he wanted. 7 hours later, a nurse came down and said Sabrina had delivered a healthy baby boy, 8 pounds, 6 ounces. Everyone was fine. She asked if I wanted to come see him. I asked if Sabrina had agreed to the paternity test. The nurse looked confused. I said there was a court order for an immediate paternity test, and I wanted to make sure it was done before I saw the baby. Harvey overheard this and said I was being ridiculous, that I was going to reject my own son because of legal paperwork. I said I'd waited this long. I could wait another few days for test results. Esther said I was traumatizing Sabrina. I said Sabrina had traumatized me first. The test was done that afternoon. The hospital took blood from the baby and from me. The results would take 3 to 5 days. I went home. Sabrina stayed in the hospital with her parents. I got text messages from her begging me to come meet the baby, saying he had my eyes, saying he was beautiful and perfect, and I was missing everything. I didn't respond. 3 days later, Richard called me. He had the results. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I drove to his office trying not to think about what the answer might be. Part of me wanted the baby to be mine because then I'd have a son. Part of me wanted the baby to not be mine because then I could walk away completely. I sat in Richard's office and he slid the paper across his desk. 99.9% probability of paternity. The baby was mine. I sat there staring at the number. I had a son whose mother had cheated on me and lied to me and let me think for months that he might not be mine. A son whose grandmother had tried to bribe me into giving up custody. A son whose grandfather thought I wasn't good enough to be his father. Richard asked what I wanted to do. I told him. All of it. Everything I'd been planning. First, I filed for full custody. Not joint custody. Full. With Sabrina getting supervised visitation until she could prove she was stable enough for more. Richard said it was aggressive, but given the circumstances, we had a shot. The affair, the lies, the family's attempts to bribe me, the fact that she'd been planning to pass off potentially another man's baby as mine, all of it painted her as an unfit mother. Second, I invoked the morality clause in the post-nup, the one Harvey and Esther had insisted on to protect their daughter from me. Turns out it worked both ways. Sabrina's admitted adultery meant she got nothing from the marriage. No house, no savings, no spousal support, nothing. Third, I filed a motion to recover my costs for the paternity test, the legal fees, and emotional distress. Richard said the emotional distress part probably wouldn't hold up, but it would make them sweat. Fourth, and this is the part I'm most proud of, I demanded that if Sabrina wanted any custody beyond supervised visitation, she needed to move out of her parents' house. Richard explained that we could argue that Harvey and Esther's influence and their relationship with Anthony created an unstable environment for my son, that their attempts to interfere in the paternity and custody situation showed they couldn't be trusted to have the child's best interests at heart. It was a long shot, but it didn't matter. The point was to make them understand that they couldn't control this situation. The papers were filed on Friday. By Monday, Harvey's lawyer was calling Richard saying they needed to talk immediately. Richard said they could talk at the custody hearing in 6 weeks. Harvey's lawyer said they wanted to settle this privately. Richard said we'd tried that and they'd rejected every reasonable offer, so now we were doing it my way. That evening, Harvey showed up at my house. I watched him through the window walking up to my door. He rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. He rang it again. Then he started knocking. Then he started yelling that he knew I was home, and we needed to talk like men. I opened the door. He was red in the face and angry. He said I was destroying his family over wounded pride, that I was keeping him from his grandson, that I was punishing Sabrina for one mistake. I said one mistake that lasted months and involved their whole family lying to me. He said they'd done what they thought was best, that they'd been trying to protect everyone. I asked how lying to me protected me. He said I wouldn't have understood the situation if they'd told me the truth. I asked if he seriously believed that. He said someone like me couldn't understand the complexities of their family dynamics. Someone like me. There it was again. I told Harvey that I understood just fine. I understood that he'd always thought I wasn't good enough for his daughter, that he'd encouraged her affair because Anthony came from the right kind of family, that he'd been planning to push me out and install Anthony as the father, regardless of paternity, that he'd offered me money to disappear because he thought I could be bought. Harvey said that wasn't true. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of our conversation in his study, the part where he said I'd been convenient for Sabrina, the part where he said Anthony had always been the right choice, the part where he offered me $200,000 to leave. His face went white. He said I'd been recording him without permission. I said it was legal in our state as long as one party consented. I'd consented. He said that conversation was private. I said not anymore. I said if he pushed me, I'd make sure everyone in their social circle heard exactly how he'd tried to buy his daughter's way out of her marriage. Harvey tried a different approach. He said we were both angry and saying things we didn't mean, that we should sit down with Sabrina and work this out as a family. I said we weren't family. We were about to be former family as soon as the divorce was final. He asked what I wanted. I told him. I wanted full custody of my son. I wanted Sabrina out of my house within 2 weeks. I wanted them to stop trying to negotiate or bribe or threaten. I wanted them to understand that they'd lost. Harvey said I couldn't get full custody, that no judge would give a newborn to the father full time. I said we'd see about that. I had evidence of adultery, evidence of their family's attempts to interfere with paternity, evidence of their attempts to bribe me. I had Sabrina on recording admitting she'd planned to lie about paternity. I had everything I needed to show she was unfit. He said Sabrina was a good mother. I said she was a liar and a cheater who'd been planning to pass off another man's baby as mine. He said one had nothing to do with the other. I said it had everything to do with it. She'd shown she was willing to lie about the most important thing in a child's life, who his father was. Harvey said if I did this, he'd make sure I regretted it, that he'd spend every penny he had to destroy me. I said go ahead. I had a paid-off house and a good job and evidence on my side. What did he have? Money he was about to spend on lawyers that wouldn't change the facts. He left. I locked the door behind him. The next morning, Sabrina came home from the hospital. Her parents had been letting her stay with them since the delivery. She walked in with the baby in a car seat and started setting up in the nursery like everything was normal. I asked what she was doing. She said she lived here. I said not for long. She asked if I wanted to hold him. I looked at the car seat. At my son sleeping in there. He did have my eyes. And my nose. He was mine. I picked him up. He was so small. He made this little sound and settled against my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt protective. Sabrina was crying watching me hold him. She said we could be a family, that we could work through this, that our son needed both his parents. I said our son would have both his parents, just not in the same house and not pretending we were a happy family. She asked if I was really going to fight for full custody. I said yes. She said no judge would give me a newborn full time. I said we'd see. She said she'd fight me. I said good. We'd both spend Harvey's money on lawyers and see who won. She asked what she was supposed to do, where she was supposed to go. I said she could stay with her parents, or Anthony, or get her own place with her part-time boutique job. I didn't care. But she had 2 weeks to find somewhere because then she needed to be out. She said I couldn't kick her out with a newborn. I said the house was mine and yes, I could. She said I was being cruel. I said she'd been cruel first. We spent the next 2 weeks in the same house not speaking, except about the baby. I took night shifts. I changed diapers. I did feedings. Sabrina watched me like she couldn't believe I actually knew how to take care of an infant. I'd been reading parenting books and watching videos for months while she'd been texting Anthony. Harvey tried to come by twice more. I didn't let him in. Esther tried once. Same result. Anthony sent me a message saying he was sorry things had turned out this way and he hoped I'd let him see the baby sometime since he'd been in Sabrina's life during the pregnancy. I blocked his number. 2 weeks to the day after Sabrina came home from the hospital, I told her time was up. She needed to leave. She said she hadn't found a place yet. I said that was her problem. She said she couldn't afford anything on her own. I said maybe her parents could help since they had so much money to throw around. She packed up her stuff crying the whole time. She asked when she could see the baby. I said we'd work out a visitation schedule through our lawyers. She said I was tearing our family apart. I said she'd done that when she'd slept with Anthony. Her parents came to pick her up. Harvey wouldn't look at me. Esther said this wasn't over. I said it was very over. After they left, I sat in my house with my son and realized I'd won. I had my house. I had my assets. I had my son. And they had nothing but legal bills and the consequences of their own actions. The custody hearing is in 4 weeks. Richard says we have a strong case. Sabrina's lawyer is already trying to negotiate for joint custody instead of fighting for primary. Harvey's money is paying for lawyers on both sides, but it's not going to change the facts. Some people in the comments said I was being too harsh, that I should forgive Sabrina for the baby's sake. But here's the thing. Forgiveness requires remorse. Real remorse. Not just being sorry you got caught. Sabrina isn't sorry she cheated. She's sorry I found out. Her parents aren't sorry they tried to manipulate me. They're sorry it didn't work. I spent 3 years being treated like I wasn't good enough by people who thought money made them better than me. I spent months being lied to about my own child's paternity. I spent weeks listening to them try to bribe and threaten and manipulate me into giving up my rights as a father. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd take their money and disappear. They thought I was too stupid or too intimidated to fight back. They were wrong. My son is sleeping in the nursery right now, in my house. The house I bought and paid for before I ever met Sabrina. The house her name was never on. The house she has no claim to. Harvey wanted to know if we had an understanding. We do now.